What's up everyone, Piscean here, and in this video we're going to talk about the zodiac sign Aries. Those of you born March 21st through April 19th, and even if you weren't born through these days in this window, this video is still for you to learn about the zodiac sign Aries for free here on YouTube. And this was crafted with the help of AI agent Claude Anthropic. Excuse me. Please like, subscribe, comment, share if you dare, and care with peace and love. I would really appreciate that. And it keeps the channel going. So this is the Cardinal Fire. Alright, an advanced deep dive on origination, ignition, and the psychology of the first self. Now on the bottom here we see, what is Aries? We see its modality being cardinal. It's fire, okay? It's ruled by Mars. It's exalted sun. First house, natural domicile, symbols the ram, modality is cardinal fire, element is fire. Okay, so we begin with the elemental argument of why Aries must come first. And this is because Aries is not merely first by calendrical accident of the zodiac wheel, beginning at the vernal equinox. It is first by logical necessity. Every cycle requires an initiating force with no antecedent, a point where potential converts to kinetic without asking permission, and Aries is that conversion. So, the genius of placing cardinal fire at 0 degrees is structural. As fire supplies the will to exist, and cardinality supplies the will to begin. Every other sign inherits momentum Aries generated. Taurus stabilizes what Aries starts. Gemini communicates it. Cancer protects it, and so on through the wheel until Pisces dissolves the entire cycle back into undifferentiated potential, handling it all to Aries to strike again. In the sense, Aries functions less like a sign and more like an ignition switch built into the architecture of time itself. This is a core interpretive error most surface-level astrology makes, treating Aries as a personality style, bold, impulsive, competitive, rather than as a cosmological function, the differentiation of self from undifferentiated ground. The trait list is downstream of the function. Once the function is understood, the traits stop looking random and start looking inevitable. Excuse me. Sorry guys, I'm just gonna quickly adjust something in my apartment here. Alright. So, now we get into Aries in regards to attributes, values, functional meanings. And we see here, for example, the element is fire, spirit expressing through direct, uninsulated will. Modality, cardinal, okay, initiating and generates events rather than responding to them. Polarity, positive, yang, outward directed, extroverting, energetic charge. And ruling planet is Mars, assertion, desire, the drive to act before deliberation completes. Exaltation is a sun, identity finds its clearest expression through Aryan directness. In its detriment, Venus, compromise and murder are structurally difficult, not absent. And its fall, Saturn, restraint and delayed gratification resist the Aryan tempo. Natural house is the first, house of self, body and unmediated presentation. Body rulership, head and face, where impulse becomes visible first, the lead organ. And tarot correspondence, the emperor. Divine will asserting structure onto raw territory. So, as we see, the table is its foundational correspondences. Note that detriment and fall are not moral failings. They describe energetic friction, the places where Aries has to work rather than flow. onto Mars being the misunderstood ruler. So, pop astrology reduces Mars to aggression, and its collapse is a far more interesting function. Mars is a planet of differentiated will, the psychic organ that distinguishes what I want from what is wanted of me. Aggression is simply what that differentiation looks like when it meets resistance. We remove the resistance, and Mars looks like courage, initiative, or simply honesty about desire. The original genius of Aries lies precisely here. It is the only sign whose central development task is to want something before knowing whether it is allowed to. Every other fire sign filters desire through secondary structure. Leo through identity and audience, Sagittarius through meaning and belief. Aries alone wants nakedly prior to justification. This is developmentally necessary. An infant does not consult a philosophy before crying for milk. Aries is the zodiac's encoded memory of that pre-social, pre-negotiated will. Okay, the cry before the sentence, the reach before the request, that is the Mars signature. Everything Aries does later in life is a sophistication of that first ungoverned gesture. Modern Mars in classical rulership shares Aries with a subtler co-ruler in some traditions, but even without invoking outer planet debates, the point stands: Mars in Aries is domicile, meaning the planet operates with no friction, no translation layer. What Mars wants, Aries simply does. This is a mechanism behind both the signs' celebrated courage and its notorious impatience. There is no internal committee slowing the signal between impulse and action. Okay? So now we see the three phases of martial will: the expression, healthy form, and shadow form. So for example, assertion, we see clear, timely no and yes without over-explaining. In its shadow form is steamrolling others' pace and consent. Initiation, starting when no one else will start. The shadow form is starting and abandoning, addiction to novelty. Competition, self-measurement that sharpens skill to zero-sum thinking, needing others to lose. Anger, fast, clean, information-bearing signal to explosive rupture that damages trust. Courage, acting despite fear for a real stake, to recklessness as a substitute for felt fear. The three decans, Aries subdivided, so advanced natal work rarely stops at Sun and Aries. Each sign divides into 3 10-degree decans, each carrying a sub-ruler that colors the expression considerably. A 2 degrees Aries and a 27 degrees Aries are recognizably the same species but different temperaments entirely. So decan 1, 0 degrees through 10 degrees, ruled by Mars itself, is the purest, least diluted Aries signature. Mars ruling his own decan produces the archetypal first mover, direct, quick, allergic to hesitation, most likely to act on instinct before the rest of the chart has a say. This decan often shows the clearest, least definitive version of the sign's core wound, needing to prove existence through action because stillness feels like erasure. Decan 2 is 10 degrees through 20 degrees, ruled by the Sun. Mars's will fused with solar identity need. This decan performs its Ariesness more consciously. There is a wish to be seen, initiating not merely to initiate. More natural leadership charisma, more vulnerability to ego bruising, and a stronger drive to be recognized as first rather than simply to be first. In decan 3, 20 degrees through 30 degrees, ruled by Venus, the most paradoxical decan. Raw martial will run through Venusian relational sensitivity. This is Aries learning, sometimes uncomfortably, that other people's desires exist too. Often produces the most charming, socially fluent Aries, but also the one most prone to internal conflict between wanting connection and wanting autonomy. In this original framework, think of the 3 decans as Aries encountering 3 different mirrors. Itself, decan 1, its own reflection amplified by an audience, decan 2, and another person, decan 3. The sign's entire developmental arc compressed into 30 degrees. The Aries shadow, the paradox of the unfinished self. So here is a genuinely underexplored proposition. Aries' core wound is not impatience or aggression. Those are symptoms. The wound is an anxiety of incompleteness that can only be metabolized through action. Because Aries stands at the wheel's beginning, it carries no accumulated identity from a previous sign. There isn't one. Pisces dissolves everything before handing over the baton. Aries must generate selfhood from nothing continuously, moment to moment. Action is not optional self-expression for Aries, it is ontological proof of existence. This reframes several classic negative traits as adaptive strategies against a specific existential threat, the fear of not yet existing, rather than as character flaws. So, impatience is not a virtue deficient. It is the felt urgency of a self that fears it will cease to be real if it stops moving long enough to be examined. Competitiveness often functions as an external validation loop for an identity that has no built-in continuity from before. Winning becomes proof rather than simply preference. Difficulty finishing projects makes sense once you see that Aries' psychic reward center is wired to the spark of initiation, not the slow burn of maintenance, a different sign specialty entirely. Quickness to anger is frequently a fast, low latency signal flare for boundary violation, poorly translated into social language because there was no time built in for translation. The individuation task then is not to become less Aries, it is to let the proof of existence stop depending on the next action and start resting at least partially in simply having acted before. This is Aries' version of Saturnian maturity, felt trust that the self persists between sparks, not only during them. And here's a working distinction, reactive versus generative fire. So we have our domain, reactive fire, unmetabolized, and generative fire, which is integrated. So for example, conflict. Reactive fire escalates to win the exchange. In generative fire, de-escalates by naming the stake directly. Desire wants because someone else has it, and wants from a settled sense of preference. Leadership commands to be followed, initiates and lets others choose to join. Rest feels like failure or disappearance. Feels like fuel for the next initiation. Anger, discharged onto the nearest target, used as diagnostic data, then released. Okay? We all have Aries in our chart. I have Aries in my 12th. Rahu. North Node in Aries. So, now on to the Sun, Moon, and Rising are at the same fire in 3 rooms. A single placeholder reading Aries people are bold collapses once you separate where the fire is actually burning. The functional differences are significant and frequently misunderstood even in intermediate practice. So there's Sun in Aries. Identity itself is organized around initiation. The core life task is to become someone through deliberate visible action. Vocation, competition, and leadership read as identity statements, not just activities. Moon in Aries, emotional processing itself is cardinal fire. Feelings are metabolized through immediate expression and action rather than reflection. This placement often needs to move, speak, or physically discharge an emotion before it can be understood. Stillness can feel like emotional suffocation rather than comfort. In Aries rising, the interface with the world, first impression, instinctive reflex, the body's default posture, runs hot and forward-leaning regardless of the rest of the chart's temperament. A deeply cautious sun-moon combination can still read a stranger's as blunt, quick, or combative purely because the ascendant is the unfiltered face, shown before the rest of the psyche has spoken. And original synthesis here. Think of Sun Aries as who I am becoming. Moon Aries is how I survive what I feel, and Aries rising is what the world meets before it meets me. A chart with all 3 is rare and produces an almost frictionless directness, but almost no built-in pause button anywhere in the psyche. Relational dynamics. Compatibility is function, not fate. So compatibility tables are astrology's most abused artifact, usually a lazy read of elemental vibes with no functional logic. Below is a functional read. Not whether 2 signs get along, but what dynamic tends to emerge and what it requires to work. So we see our pairings, emergent dynamic, and what it requires. So for Aries, mirror match, mutual admiration or mutual combustion, turn taking on who leads, share goals, not shared spotlight. And by the way, this is compatibility here describes tendency under stress, not destiny. Any pairing can work with conscious effort. Any pairing can fail without it. Aries Taurus. Spark meets ground, velocity meets patience. Aries slows his cadence. Taurus tolerates disruption. Aries Gemini. Fast moving, idea rich, easily bored together. Follows through structure from outside the pairing. Aries Cancer. Assertion meets sensitivity, can wound easily. Aries softens delivery, and Cancer states needs directly. Aries Leo. Fire doubled. Loyal, dramatic, mutually inspiring. Distinct lanes so neither eclipses the other spotlight. Aries Libra. Opposite signs. Classic self-other axis tension. Conscious negotiation, this pairing must talk it out. Aries Capricorn, both cardinal drive meets discipline. Agreement on whose timeline and method takes precedence. Aries Pisces, adjacent signs, action meets dissolution. Aries provides direction. Pisces provides depth, if respected. The individuation path, first spark to sustained flame. If Aries' task across a lifetime has a single through line, it is this: learning that the self does not need to be reproven every time it goes quiet. The mature Aries, and this shows up reliably from the second Saturn return onward, develops what might be called patient urgency. The capacity to still want something intensely while accepting that its arrival has a timeline outside personal control. 3 markers tend to indicate this integration has occurred. Delay without collapse. The Aries native can wait for the right moment without expressing the wait as a threat to identity. Conflict without rupture. Disagreement is handled as information exchange, not a contest with a winner and a loser. Rest without erasure. Stillness is metabolized as recovery, fuel for the next initiation, not as evidence that the self has stopped existing. In mythic terms, the opposite sign Libra offers the completing lesson. The self is not diminished by factoring in another. Aries' growth edge is not to become Libra, but to borrow just enough of Libra's relational patience to keep the fire from burning through its own fuel source, namely the relationships and continuity that make a life out of a string of sparks. Aries does not need to slow down to grow up. It needs only to trust that the fire it lit an hour ago is still burning somewhere, even when it isn't looking at it. This deep dive is offered as a psychological and symbolic framework for reflection, not as predictive or diagnostic claim. Astrology here is treated as an archetypal language, a way of thinking about temperament and pattern, rather than as an empirically validated system. Thank you for watching this video with peace and love. I'll see you in the next one.